Hey everyone, this is going to be a video called A Deep Dive into Coding Agents like Claude Code or Claude Code 101. Why coding agents? So I think I wanted to make this video because over the last 6 to 9 months, I've had this realization that work is changing a lot. Wrote a post about this 3 weeks ago. I basically talked about how knowledge work is changing and just how the printing press had a dramatic effect on how many books could be printed, and there were second order and first order effects. I think the same thing is happening with knowledge work right now, where coding agents have unlocked a certain amount of capability. And I think it is actually because of coding agents like Claude Code. There's other ones like Codex or Open Code, but Claude Code is the first one, and I still think a really good one. And I believe these agents will do more and more knowledge work. And I think you're already seeing it with the development of agent skills. You can see these skills being packaged up into plugins. And, I think people thought that software engineering jobs were the first ones that were going to, kind of get disrupted because these coding agents could write so much good code. But I think what has happened is these agents have the ability to write reliable code and the ability for that code to do things. And so you can think of this coding agent now as an AI that can write code in order to accomplish tasks. And that's really huge. And so I just wanted to talk about what that's like. Um, First, a little bit about my journey. I have been a data scientist for 10 plus years. I've worked in data analytics, trained machine learning models. Some of the tools I've used are both R and Python. Started out using mainly R and RStudio, using dplyr and the tidyverse. Did a lot in SQL. Eventually moved into the Python data world using things like sklearn, PyTorch, Pandas, Jupyter, Streamlit. When I had questions, I would go to Google and use Stack Overflow. And back in 2022, November, ChatGPT came out. That was massive. And I remember thinking, this is amazing, right? Any question I have, I can get a really good answer. And this technology, LLMs has improved drastically. And this year, that year, there was libraries like LangChain, so you could build AI applications on top of these models. Prompt engineering was pretty big. There are a lot of strategies around how to prompt these models. And the first real AI application came out. It was called GitHub Copilot. A lot of developers loved it. It was code completion. You would type some code, and it would suggest what the next best um, code was going to be. And then 2024, LangGraph and Cursor came out. I have a post I can walk through too. So in 2024, things like LangGraph and Cursor came out. So I remember 2024 being the year of agent frameworks. It seemed like everyone was coming up with an agent framework. There's LangGraph, Crew AI. Um, Google came out with one called 80K. LangGraph was the one I was most familiar with. It was really cool. You could build these tool calling agents to do whatever you wanted. And at this time, Cursor also came out. Cursor was a the next generation IDE. You could think of it as it had this chat bar on the side. You could give it simple tasks, write unit tests for me, or tell me about my code base, and it would explore your code that was living on your computer. So that was really awesome. And 2025, though, this tool called Claude Code came out. And I remember in March, I first heard about Claude Code, and I thought it was yet another agent framework, so I didn't really think about it much. But around July, I I started to use it. And I remember writing this post, like why I started to try it. And I think couple things happened. One is the models improved. I think when Claude Code first came out, it was using Claude 3.7 Sonnet. And, in July, people started talking about some of the capabilities, right? Armin started talking about it. Eric Ma posted about it. And, I started paying attention and um, I thought, okay, why don't I try it? And at work, we happened to use Vertex AI, and Google had signed an agreement with Anthropic to license Claude models. So I was able to use it for my work. And yeah, I remember being on PTO that week, and I used Claude Code to build this application I've always wanted, which was I wanted to make this internal website using fast HTML because I had heard it was much more flexible than Streamlit and Gradio. And I finally got around to it thanks to Claude Code. I was just on vacation and kind of building it on the side. And yeah, it was awesome to be able to build this fast HTML, fast API service. Um, so it could serve static websites as well as serve APIs all in one deployment. The second thing I built was an MCP server using fast MCP. And all of these things, I probably could have done by myself, but I think it would have taken me 2 to 3 days to do. But Claude Code did it in less than 2 hours with about 5 prompts. So this was absolutely pretty mind blowing. And this was in July of 2025. And, as I look back on the development, things have just continued to change, right? You have now in January 2026, there was so much demand for Claude Code, right? You had non technical people wanting to use it. So Anthropic finally made this UI around Claude Code, which is called Claude Cowork. So yeah, it's been pretty awesome. And just to say a little bit about how things have changed from going from say ChatGPT to the early agent frameworks to something like Claude Code and why there's a difference. So ChatGPT, right, you can think of it as kind of like an agent. It has a model. GPT-5 used to be GPT-3, 4, and now it's 5. There's some tools that the model can use, like a search tool if it needs to look up recent information. It has a coding tool if it needs to write code to do math or do any sort of calculations or maybe build some application. It has an image generation tool to call the model or the image generation model. So when you send a message into ChatGPT, it decides which tools to use. Um, the challenge is it's difficult to connect this to your your own data. I think ChatGPT has made improvements here where you can use their connectors to connect to things like Gmail or Google Drive or other applications. Around 2023, 2024, you had these V1 agent frameworks. One of the more popular ones was LangChain or LangGraph. And here, how they would work is you would use and define your agent with a language model. It could be open source or closed source. Pick GPT or Claude or a Gemini model. Then you could create these tools. These tools could literally do anything. So here in my example, imagine you created a tool that fetched some data, and then you would bind the tool to your LLM. And then here, this is your agent. So, and then once you defined it, you could run it. And once I ran it, I, as a user, imagine I sent this query to my agent. Oh, hey, how are my sales? Agent would receive this input. The agent would determine, do I have a tool that is bound to me that would help me run this query? If yes, then run it. If no, then go back to the LLM and try to answer it using your own knowledge that's in your model weights. But if yes, uh, then you need to generate the parameters to call this fetch data tool. The fetch data tool would actually be invoked. Uh, the data would come back as a function response or tool response. This tool response would be sent back to the language model, and the language model would then use it to answer the user's question, how are my sales? Then here it would generate this response, sales are 50,000 this year, and this is what the user would see. And so this was called, a tool calling agent or a React agent or an agent with a tool calling loop, because this loop doesn't have to just run once. You can imagine this agent could have 10 tools bound to it, and maybe some of those tools are called multiple times in succession. So these agents could get actually quite complicated. And then in 2025, Claude Code came out, and I think this was a different type of agent framework. I didn't realize it at the time. And they're generally called coding agents, and they're different than the V1 in that they come with some predefined tools. And the most important predefined tool, I think, is the bash tool. And bash, if you're not familiar, is just a terminal that where you can run any sort of command line utility. And these command line utilities have been around for decades, and they do a broad set of things that you would typically want to do in a programming environment or software development environment. And so because the model has this bash tool now, it instantly has access to thousands of command line tools. So it's not just one tool, but many tools that are in its tool belt now. And additionally, the model itself has knowledge about many of these tools. And so the model has seen, a lot of documentation around, a CLI tool like FFmpeg, which is typically used to do anything with video or audio in a command line. And so your model knows how to use FFmpeg. And in Claude Code now, it can directly call that and do things with it. Like, okay, convert this video into a different format or get the audio out of this video file. And it can use these tools because it has access to a computer as well to run these tools. It also has tools to read, edit, write, files that live on a computer, and then grep tool to search files agentically. It has a bunch of other tools, but these are the main tools that I think are important. And then here, using the same example, the user sends the same question in, how are my sales? Here, I didn't create any fetch data tool. I think, I've used Claude Code to do similar types of things, these generic data questions. And I've seen it do this where it'll take this bash tool, it'll use, if your data is in BigQuery, it'll use the BigQuery CLI. It'll use that CLI to agentically explore BigQuery tables. It'll then write some SQL to query the tables it needs, maybe in a sales table. It'll actually run the query. It'll get the output, send it back to the language model. The language model will then write the response. Maybe the same answer, sales are 50,000 this year. But here, imagine why this is more powerful. Like, I don't need any custom tools anymore because this coding agent has become much more general. And I hope you can see why now, or why coding agents have such general capability. I think another way to frame this is coding agents allow you to go deeper and broader. I think going from no AI usage to something like ChatGPT, many people, they replaced Google with ChatGPT. But through this lesson, I want to make the case for why coding agents are another step change in usefulness. And when to use ChatGPT versus Claude Code. I think ChatGPT or chat-based AI is still good for general Q&A, but coding agents are good for general knowledge work. anything you want to do on a computer, whether it's anything that touches software, any sort of documents, right? These things, it's now, I think, much more effective to use a tool like Claude Code. And every person has a different skill set and experience. We all have different jobs. We all have different journeys to those jobs, different educations, different backgrounds. I think coding agents, they allow you to go deeper in your area of expertise as well as broader into adjacent areas. So using myself as an example, I'm a data scientist, and I think Claude Code has allowed me to go deeper as a data scientist. So traditionally, uh, as a data scientist, you would typically be given a model. Um, or just to talk through this flow, so I have this diagram of different roles that you play or that people play in the machine learning lifecycle. So, and the data scientist sits somewhere in the middle. So there's some product manager who has some use case. Oh, hey, I have this business problem. I'm wondering if this can be solved with data science or machine learning. There's a project manager who manages the project's milestones. The data scientist will interface with these two people to make sure that this is actually a problem that can be solved with machine learning or data science. This data scientist will work with a data engineer who usually writes data pipelines to ensure the data scientist has access to the data he needs. The data scientist, once he trains the model, it'll be given to this ML engineer who is in charge of deploying and productionizing the model. There's some deployed service that then your additional engineers like a backend engineer or front end engineer then integrate into the application. So this is all pretty typical in a machine learning project. And I've done this for many years. I've worked with many different product managers and data engineers. Typically, we have some data, have some uh, conversations with the product manager. We then go through some cycles to do some exploratory data analysis, to run some experiments, to train some models, to evaluate them. And this iteration usually takes a few months. And yeah, out at the end of that, usually you have a model that you then push to production. I think what Claude Code has allowed me to do is to go much deeper in this area. There are many different types of machine learning models. You have linear models, you have nonlinear models. You also have these transformer models now that are the basis of every language model now. And so what Claude Code has enabled me to do is to actually train some of these models now and to fine tune these models for different tasks. Also scale up the training on GPUs using GCP's or Google Cloud's Vertex AI pipeline service. It's their wrapper around a technology called Kubeflow. And just a comment about this technology in particular, it's not an easy technology to work with. It has its own syntax. It's basically a domain-specific language, and it there's a learning curve, a pretty steep learning curve, and I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle to write this code because it was difficult to reason over. And I think Claude Code, though, can very easily write this code and debug it and answer questions about it too. So I think it doesn't really matter now how complicated a domain specific language is. Claude Code can usually interact with it really well. I think Claude Code has also allowed me to play in different areas, both upstream and downstream from machine learning. So it's allowed me to play as a data engineer. So now if I'm given access to raw data, I can build my own data pipelines and engineer my own features and iterate really quickly to build my own data pipelines to do things that a traditional data engineer would do. Or as an ML engineer, I can experiment with different deployment patterns. Do I need a GPU to serve this model or do I not? And so it allows me to play in this role as well. It allows me to also manage my own projects well because all of these different um, roles have different skills and tools they use. So a project manager typically lives in a project management software like Jira or Linear. And coding agents like Claude Code can use arbitrary APIs like the Jira API or the Linear API. And so I can use Claude Code to create new tasks or issues in Jira. I can use it to summarize sprints or periods of work. I can use it to plan future blocks of work. And so it functions actually quite capably as a project manager. And also, Claude Code has enabled me to do things adjacent to these roles, things that we've never really had time to do. And I think if you're curious and you're eager to learn, you can use a tool like Claude Code to make yourself way more productive. And so I've used it to build reusable Python tooling, like cookie cutter templates for Python libraries and services. I've used it to learn a lot about GitHub Actions, to automate a lot of code review, um, to use things like the Claude Code GitHub Action, to create composite actions that can be used by my other team members. And these are things that I was not really familiar with. GitHub Actions is its own domain-specific language, but Claude Code, there's a lot of GitHub Action data that's in its training data, and it can write and reason over GitHub Actions quite well. It allowed me to build and maintain LLM gateways like Light LLM, and also to build skills marketplaces, like these code repositories that house a lot of agent skills that can be shared across an organization. So yeah, all these things I would not even consider doing if I didn't have access to a tool like Claude Code. All right, now I wanted to talk a little bit about Claude Code itself. So if you've never used it, it is an coding agent that lives on your computer. So that's a fundamental difference from something like ChatGPT or Gemini, which you may have been used to. So you also need a subscription to uh, Claude to do that. The cheapest one is $20 a month. And to install it, you do need some technical capability, and if you don't know how to do this, you could try to run these commands if you have a Mac or Windows. And then I think if you run into issues, you can easily just ask Gemini or ChatGPT, how do I set up Claude Code? And then it'll tell you how to do it. Uh, and then if you run into issues, you can copy paste the errors you're seeing into these chat-based agents. But then once you're actually set up, you can then just use Claude Code directly to. In terms of the interface, there's multiple interfaces. So I'll just start one here in a terminal. And then you can say things like, hi. I can also start one here. This is in a VS Code terminal. Then I can also start one in the VS Code extension. So these are all different interfaces to Claude Code. I would say they're probably 90% similar, but they do have some differences in that the main difference is the tools that are used and the files and context that it is used could be different. For example, here you can see that there's this file that is referenced because I have this file that's open in my VS Code editor. And so Claude is going to use that. Or here you can see in the VS Code terminal, it knows that I'm in this file. And so it's going to, by default, reference that. So that is something that you may or may not want, but by default, that's sort of the behavior of Claude Code. Next, the things that Claude Code can access are actually things on your computer, right? So you can then do things like, okay, for this diagram, you can say, okay, tell me about this file. And Claude will find the file, it'll read this file, and this file is the thing I was talking through. And it will, you can see that it read the file in because it's a JSON file. And it'll take some time to think and then it'll tell me about it. Let's just give it a minute. I think it's reading different parts of the file now. You can hit Control O to expand it. Yeah, you can see that it's reading, around 1,000 lines at once. And so this is pretty common. You'll see that when you reference a file, Claude will read the file in, and then it'll run these tasks where it's actually prompting itself. So you can see here, okay, I want you to read this file, extract all the text content from the text fields in the elements array, because it knows something about this file format called Excalidraw. And because it's large, they're going to offset or paginate through the file, which is pretty cool. And then focus only on elements where the type is text and is deleted as false. Okay, I didn't know that there's this is deleted key. Return a summary of all the text content you find. So yeah, here we go. Here's what it's covered. And yeah, this is something that is pretty useful, right? If you want to summarize any sort of file that lives on your computer. Okay, so I wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of Claude Cowork and Claude Code in the terminal. So Claude Cowork is pretty new. I think it came out in January of 2026. And Anthropic made this because they realized that there were all these non-technical people who are not developers, who are not familiar with this terminal interface, they were using it. And I've seen this a lot where because of how valuable Claude Code is, people are learning how to use the terminal. And so they made this Cowork tab that's in the Claude desktop app that is essentially a wrapper around Claude Code. I learned about this on podcast recently, and so it's essentially Claude Code, but there are special prompts that have been optimized for general knowledge work. So in theory, it should behave similarly to Claude Code, but there's probably some differences that, because I have not used Cowork all that much. I mainly use Claude Code in the terminal. I don't fully know the differences quite yet. But we can try to do a task side by side to try to do this. So here I have some data in this folder that's in that has to do with some marathon training or marathon race data from the Long Beach Marathon that I ran. So we'll try to do some visualizations of that. So let's try this. Can you build a dashboard that shows the marathon races from the last 10 years? Just prompt this, and then I'll prompt it here too. Oh, I did not start Claude. So let's see how this goes. So in Claude Cowork, you can also see these things. Okay, so it ran, it generated a tool call called Ask the User Question. So, I'm going to say this is for one marathon Long Beach. Average race times for male and female. And I want an interactive HTML file. Here, Claude Code is doing something different. You can kind of see that there's already some differences going on here where it actually loaded a skill, and I was going to talk about that later. But skills are things that agents can use to perform some task or reference some expert knowledge. So here, there's a skill called front end design that I have installed, and this encapsulates a lot of front end design principles. So I can show that. This is a skill here, right? Create distinctive production grade front end interfaces with high design quality. Use the skill when the user asks to build web components, pages, artifacts, posters, or applications. So, so yeah, it's using this skill now. I'm reminded of this scene in The Matrix whenever I use an agent skill. It's the helicopter scene where Trinity needs to figure out how to fly an airplane.
Can you fly that thing?
Not yet.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter. Hurry. Let's go.
Yeah, that's basically what agent skills are doing. They are loading these skills on demand whenever they're required. You could trigger them yourself, or they could be triggered automatically, like you saw here. Because this is building a dashboard, I think it found this skill was going to be useful. And because it's using this skill now, it has much better front end design taste than it would out of the box. And this is actually one of the reasons why coding agents like Claude Code have become so useful. Right now, you have hundreds and thousands of skills that are available now that are encoding and encapsulating the very best of domain knowledge. And I will show that a bit later as well. So this is still taking kind of a bit of time. So here, oh, it looks like it did not know that the data was here. So maybe I'll clarify that later. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So it looks like this is the dashboard it made. Nice. So I had the data locally, so I think it used it. There's 23,000 finishers. Yep, I know there's no marathon in COVID. Marathons have gotten a lot more popular recently. Yeah, the 2025 marathon was absolutely really crowded. And yeah, this is really cool. I kind of wanted something like this. The men and women's average finishing time. This is cool. This is generally what I wanted. And yeah, this is all built by Claude Cowork. And if you wanted to do things like, okay, can you teach me about the code you wrote? Maybe I don't understand any of the code it wrote, but maybe I want to learn how it did that. You can then ask Claude Cowork to teach it to you. Looks like Claude Code is still going. Not sure why it's taking so long, but okay. Yeah, Claude Cowork, I think, can actually control my computer now. I have not used this before. So I will go with 2. Okay, so it tells me that the data is in this JavaScript array called raw data. Average time is in minutes. It created a helper function to convert these numbers into a readable. Nice. The layout is in HTML and CSS. Cool. It's using something called chart.js. The layout uses a CSS grid. Charts are powered by Chart.js, free library. Cool. Interactivity, the year buttons are wired up with an add event listener. And then the table is built dynamically by a build table function. Cool. Actually learned some things here since I'm not really a JavaScript developer, but this also, it teaches you about anything that it's building. And I think that's just something I want to highlight where Claude Code is not just for coding, right? If you want to publish this somewhere, you could even say something like, can you help me publish this dashboard as a GitHub page? Right? Maybe I want to serve this as a website. And so I want help to publish it on a GitHub page because I know that's a way to freely host a website. And another thing I want to highlight is it's a conversation that I'll call it Long Beach Marathon Dashboard. It's a conversation. You don't need perfect prompts, and you can just ask what you want it to build, and you can build it now. I think coding agents like Claude Code have unlocked this capability where you're really only limited by your imagination of what is possible now. So, here I wanted this dashboard that shows marathon races from the last 10 years, and I have it now. But you can imagine doing this for anything, either related to your work, any task in your work, or any task or project you're working on in your personal life. It's generally useful. Another thing that I find helpful is the Claude Code docs. I often refer to them quite a bit because Claude Code itself changes quite frequently. So yeah, this is one of the main ones. It's how Claude Code works, and I'll just talk through some of these things. This agentic loop, I talked about this a little bit before, but this diagram also shows it well, where your prompt goes in. This is the agentic loop where context is gathered, some actions are taken, the results are verified, and all of these things use tools like the bash tool or a search tool or editing files or the bash tool again to run code. And all the while you can interrupt, steer, or add context, and then it usually finishes. So, we saw that before, but I can show that again. With the same prompt. Right, so now this is my prompt. It's going through this agentic loop right now. So there's some thinking going on. And yeah, it looks like it loaded the front end design skill again. So I'm going to cancel this. So and then they talk about how the agentic loop is powered by two components, models that reason and tools that act. So Claude Code, you have access to Anthropic models unless you use an LLM gateway, like Light LLM, where you can then use other models, actually. If you type /model, you can set the model. Sonnet is the default model, kind of like the medium intelligence model. It's on version 4.6 right now. You also have Sonnet with a 1 million context. The default has around 200,000 tokens of context. Sonnet has 1 million. Opus is the larger, more intelligent model. There's also Opus, 1 million context. Haiku is the cheapest, fastest model. There's no Haiku 4.6 yet, on 4.5. And then Opus plan mode is you're using Opus when you're in plan mode, which I'll talk about, and then you're in Sonnet otherwise. So that's what I'm going to use right now. On the tool side, this is a list of tools that are available to Claude. You can open this page. So this is the full tools reference of all the things that Claude has access to. As an agent tool, as the bash tool that can execute shell commands. This is relatively new. You can create and edit crons, which give it this claw-like behavior, which is scheduling tasks. Other things I found useful. Claude likes making task lists for itself, which is nice. Also, can interact with Jupyter Notebook. So there's a notebook edit. I actually find it doesn't do the best job working with Jupyter because Jupyter is a large JSON file and it's better to just work with Python files directly. But yeah, these are some of the tools. You can also do a web search, web fetch. Going back to this. So what Claude Code can access? So yeah, it says when Claude runs in a directory, you get access. Claude gains access to your project, anything in your folder, your terminal, your Git state, your Claude MD. Your Claude MD is a markdown file where you store project specific instructions. So this kind of goes into memory where there is a page dedicated to memory and it's pretty complex, but you can think of memory as if you're familiar with what a system prompt is. So this is a piece of text that gets injected every time a message is sent to the model. And there's a different layer of hierarchy here. It starts with user memory, which is stored in your home directory if you're on a Mac. And then it goes to project memory. And then it goes to auto memory, which is relatively new. But these are instructions to give Claude, rules it should follow or your conventions for your project or things that maybe mistakes have been made in the past and you want it to do something differently. So if you want to learn more about memory, I would really study this page well. There's a lot of good detail there. If I go back to this, I will skip execution environments. I'm going to go back here. This is talking about resuming or forking a session. So if you leave a session and you start up Claude Code again, you can also do -C to continue your last session, or you can. So this will actually load the context from my previous conversation, or you can just load Claude as normal, type resume, and then pick the one that you want to find. I only have one session in this project, so I'm not going to pick that. Other things that are useful is plan mode. So here I'm just in the default mode, but if you hit Shift Tab, there's different modes, and one of the important ones is plan mode. So I will send the same message again, but while I'm in plan mode. And the only thing different about plan mode is all Claude Code will do is it'll work with you to build a plan to where you agree with Claude on this plan, and it's not going to write any code yet. But once it agrees on the plan, you can iterate and give feedback. And then once you're done with it, you can then have Claude implement the plan. I usually use this for larger tasks where I know that it's going to take some time and a couple turns to get the right format and the right instructions and for Claude to understand what I really want. While this is going, I can talk through some ways to work effectively with Claude. You can always ask Claude for help. So Claude is interesting in that it's a tool you can ask it how do you do something with Claude, right? So you can ask, how do I set up hooks? Or what's the best way to structure Claude MD? And Claude, at least right now, will use things like, maybe I'll start a new one to do this. I'll just send this question in. How do I set up hooks? And I think what it does is it'll actually yeah, use this skill to that's called the Claude Code guide, and it's gonna fetch this Claude Code docs map, which if we go to it, kind of cool. The markdown file that has a mapping of all their docs. So it's kind of cool. Actually, a pretty large file. So this gives Claude the ability to find the relevant documentation that's always up to date. So yeah, it's able to answer questions based on its docs. There's built-in commands that also guide you through the setup. So /init walks you through creating a Claude MD for your project. You can run that. Let's see if this is done. Oh, the plan is still going. So you can notice that you can have as many Claude codes running at once. You know, at work, I'll typically have 3 to 5 terminal windows open. You can spawn a lot of these, and there is a bit of context switching, but I think you kind of get used to it as you use Claude more. And I'll type init to trigger the creation of a Claude MD file. And you can see what that looks like. It's still going. It's been going for 4 minutes. So other things to keep in mind is it's a conversation. So you don't need perfect prompts. Start with what you want, then refine. You can always refine what you want, right? So this is a pretty generic thing or request. And you can often steer it, right? Once you review what Claude has found. Definitely better to be specific up front. And it's better to specify exactly what you want. Give Claude something to verify against. This is also really good, where if you have an idea of what success looks like, that could be unit tests in the software development case, or screenshots of a UI, or if you're training a model, it could be a baseline model. So it's often better to give Claude a way to verify its work. This will vastly improve its capability. And I think that's all I'm going to say about this. You can see here, this wrote Claude MD. So you can see that, oh, hey, this file provides guidance to Claude Code. This is the repository's purpose. There's key diagrams. So I used to use /init, but I think recently I've decided to just hand edit Claude MD at this point, where anytime I see Claude not doing something I want, I'll take that moment to add a line to Claude MD, either at the project or user level, to steer it differently. Okay, so this is still going. Maybe we'll come back to this. All right, now I just want to talk about skills. The skills are really important. And similar to before, there's a dedicated docs page about skills. I would encourage you to read it. So skills, they extend what Claude can do. You create a skill.md file with instructions. Claude adds it to its toolkit. Claude uses skills when relevant, or you can invoke one directly with a skill name. I'll just demonstrate this with a skill that comes from the Claude Code plugin. So I'm going to use the front-end design skill to improve the dashboard. So this skill, remember, was here. You can look at it a bit. This one is pretty simple. It just has one skill MD. While this fires, I will make a new one. I will use a skill to create a skill. So one of the skills that's really useful is called Skill Creator. It's a meta skill to create skills. So if you want to create a skill to review blog posts and provide Hacker News style comments. So this is going to use a skill to create skills. And in general, I think this is probably the best way to create skills rather than just sending this bare prompt by itself. The main reason is this skill is a little more complicated in that a skill can also have scripts and other reference files that the skill markdown file will reference. And here, one thing that's amazing about this skill is after it writes the initial draft of the skill, it'll create a few test cases or prompts and run Claude on them. And then there's even an evaluation viewer to show you the evaluation runs. So yeah, you'll probably see this here as it runs. So this front end design skill is still running. But this is really amazing. And these skills can include as many scripts as you want, as many reference files as you want. And skills, they generally live in multiple places. So similar to Claude, you can put them in your project directory or your home directory. Right? So in your home directory, you have a .claude folder and a skills folder. And skills are usually put in a folder with the skill name. And then the most important file is the skill.md. It's a YAML file, or it's a markdown file with YAML front matter. So you need a name and a description. And then here are just instructions that follow after. Yeah, this shows you the location where skills can live, your personal home directory, project-based, plugin, I will talk about that. And then enterprise, where you can have enterprise managed skills. Keep running this. Okay, so it's created a skill, and now it's running 3 test cases about a Rust post, attention economy essay, and a vector DB weekend project. And it's going to spawn 6 runs, 3 evals, 3 with the skill and 3 without the skill. And this is all being run simultaneously. And it's running background agents to run these evaluations, which is really amazing. I think I wanted to also reference a couple things too. Control who invokes a skill. So there used to be a notion of a slash command, but Anthropic has combined skills and slash commands so that anything you want to do with a command, you can do in a skill now. So if you don't use any of these YAML parameters, you can always type the skill name to invoke it. But if you don't want the model to automatically trigger a skill, like earlier you saw this front end design skill get triggered automatically. That was the model invoking the skill. But if you set this disable model invocation to true, then only you as the user can invoke the skill. If you don't want the user to invoke it, you can set user invocable to false. So then only Claude can invoke the skill. And this is good for background knowledge. Go back to here. Like these test cases are still running. This dashboard has run. Okay. Looks, I think, a lot better than before. Kind of cool. I like how there's highlights of what is being selected. Kind of cool. This is way more beautiful than anything I could have made. And it tells you all the structural changes it made. So this is the power of skills. So going back to this is the Claude Code plan. You can see here that it saves plans to my home directory. And, you know, you have different choices. I can, yes, bypass permissions and implement. Yes, implement, but I will manually approve edits, or I can give Claude feedback. So this is really nice. I use this quite a bit when I'm working on a task that is a little bit more complicated. It's still going. I think some test cases are still running. See if I can interrupt it. So this is the eval viewer that the skill creator skill creates. You can see that and step through all of these prompts and see the results with and without the skill. And then you can also give feedback. Once you submit all the reviews, then Claude Code can use this to iterate on this, which is really nice. Another thing I want to talk about is, so skills, they are coding agent agnostic, meaning that you can use them in any coding agent, not just Claude Code. Vercel has this skills ecosystem called skills.sh. Their top skill is find skills. It's kind of cool. You can use it to help discover skills. So, yeah, this is probably pretty useful too. I haven't really used it that much. I would caution you though on using any third-party skill. I generally trust official repos like Anthropic and OpenAI. But there is always prompt injection risk from any public skill, so I would just be careful. The Claude Code way of packaging up plugins or packaging up skills is in a plugin. So there's different repositories that have plugins. Here's one, Claude Plugins Official. The front end design one that we've used comes from here. There's other ones like skill creators here. These knowledge work plugins are also really fascinating. These span a wide variety of industries and roles. This data one is interesting because I work with data a lot. There are a lot of different data related skills, and it is pretty amazing that we can output so much information and instructions into these skills, and Claude can do those things now. This one is interesting. This is in the data knowledge work plugin skill. There's a skill called data context extractor. And this is a meta skill that extracts company specific data knowledge from analysts and generates tailored data analysis skills. So this is one that lives in the background. Anytime that a data analysis skill is being run, this skill will extract tribal knowledge from analysts. So this is really fascinating. Um, I've not personally used this yet, but this could be a good way to, um, you know, make sure that you're capturing tribal knowledge from people so that you can host it. These are the commands to add a plugin marketplace. So if you want to add the knowledge work plugins, you can run this command in your terminal. Or if you want to install a specific plugin, you can run this after you've added the marketplace. The official Anthropic marketplace is already installed and automatically updated. Other plugins you have to manually update. So these are the commands to run. This compound engineering plugin is also really useful. So for software engineering tasks, it's pretty useful. Looks like there's a new one that's added. There used to only be 4: plan, work, review, compound. Now there's also ideate and brainstorm. But I've used this a couple times and it's helpful. I think similar to Claude Code's plan mode, you turn your ideas into these detailed implementation plans. Work executes the plans. There's this multi-agent code review that uses smaller models for different reviews, like for security and architecture, things like that. And then this compound review documents learnings to make future work easier, which is a really good idea. So this is an idea of chaining skills together, where each of these, there's multiple skills underneath the hood that are chained together. So that's another thing you can do with skills. I'll just end with this, where earlier I was talking about how coding agents allow you to go both deeper and broader. So these are just different examples from the last few months on how I've gone deeper and broader. So as a data scientist, I've built this agentic ML plugin that allows you to run 10 skills as part of the machine learning lifecycle. And you can run it end to end using one skill called orchestrate E to E. And this surprisingly works. You can just pass it a data set and it'll go through all of these skills. And at the very end, you will get an explained model. I've also used Claude Code along with Andre Karpathy's auto research repo to improve ML models by about 15 or 20%. And these are models I've worked on for months. Auto research is a pretty amazing library. It runs short training loops with agentic reasoning. And on every turn, the agent discovers and finds the right parameters or new parameters to tune. And this typically takes a lot of time to write this code, review the results, and decide what to do next. But auto research automates all of that. And it's a really amazing project. I've used Claude Code to use the GitHub CLI to understand new code bases. This definitely works better than the GitHub MCP. I've also used it to explore new data sources in BigQuery using the BigQuery CLI. And then in terms of broader and data adjacent fields, I've used Claude Code to build internal tools. This was last July, but I built this fast HTML web app for this internal company tool. I had not used fast HTML before because it was relatively new, but Claude Code figured out how to combine fast HTML and fast API since they're both Starlet apps. I also built an MCP server with fast MCP, with bearer token authentication. I think if I needed to do this myself, it would have taken a couple days, but I finished this in a couple hours. I built this open source MCP server called MCP Lightcast. I'd worked with the Lightcast API for a while. There's no MCP server, so I built it. And yeah, I would not have done this without Claude Code. GitHub Actions. I've set up GitHub Actions to do Claude Code reviews, to generate commits, which is really cool. I was inspired because I saw the Anthropic team do this when I opened an issue and they closed it by tagging it with @Claude, can you fix it? Which thought was really amazing. Yeah, so here you can see I opened this issue. This link was broken. Ashwin said it should link here, pass the link. And he wrote @Claude, can you fix it? And Claude, 37 seconds later, added this comment, which has these links to create to a branch, as well as a link to create a PR, which I was blown away by that this worked. And, now we have this internally in my company. In terms of other engineering work, I've created and maintained cookie cutter templates for Python libraries, troubleshooted Kubernetes pods. I wrote documentation Confluence pages via the MCP Atlassian server. I've also created presentations in Quarto and React.js that are themed for the company. I've also used this skill, the front end slide skill, to improve it. And yeah, a bunch of things for personal things. I've added graphs and visuals to blog posts. It's helped me write different articles about charitable contributions bunching. Actually, last year it helped me prepare for my annual review, where a lot of data is in GitHub or Jira or Confluence, things that I've done. And so I use Claude Code to compile evidence of my work, where Claude Code fetched all of my commits in the last year in our GitHub organization using the GitHub CLI. It pulled all of my closed Jira tickets via the Jira MCP. It fetched all the Confluence pages I'd authored via Confluence MCP. And it summarized all of my work and matched it to my goals. And I think this provided a massively richer annual review than I would have otherwise written based on my memory. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say for today. Thanks.